Hello and welcome to this video and to my first trip to the theatre in Sheffield. That happened several weeks ago from now, but I obviously didn't know how to vlog and didn't do an intro and an outro. So just a short one, me coming in at the beginning just to say here's my trip to the theatre. It's a big day in the old life in Sheffield miss, because I'm heading off to the theatre for the first time. Let me cross the road without getting run over. Yes, I'm off to the theatre to see my first show. I'm off to see Beautiful, which is the Carole King musical. So I'm going to find out what the Lyceum's all about and what it's like. And I bought the cheapest ticket because I'm tight, but also I was intrigued to see what the cheap seats were like, to whether that you really do need to pay more to get a better view and all of that kind of thing. So that's where we're off to. The show starts at 7:45, which I feel is quite late, or later than other ones that I've been to in London, which is normally a 7:30 start, but I live within walking distance of the theatre, so really not an issue. So let's see what this is like. So I'm going alone because it's not Pete's thing, and to be honest I don't actually mind doing these things alone. I've done it a few times now with the cinema and stuff, but the theatre's no different. And once you're in, you don't really talk to each other anyway. The only time it becomes apparent is in the interval, and also at the end of the show when you've got no one to discuss it with. But really, it doesn't matter. But because it's a musical about Carole King, I'm expecting to be one of the younger people in the audience. But maybe I'll make friends with some old ladies or something. We'll see. But we're coming up to the theatre, so if you're not from Sheffield, like I wasn't before, the Lyceum is this building here, and then the Crucible is right next door. So the Crucible also does shows, and it's famous for like the snooker and things. But we are off to the Lyceum, which incidentally is the same name as the theatre that the Lion King's at in London. There's a video on my channel about that as well, so I'll link that up here just in case you're interested in that one. But I need to put you away so I can find my tickets and stuff, but there you go. There's the Lyceum. So I'm back from the theatre. I figured it'd be easier to film it sat down in the flat than trying to walk back in the dark and you not be able to see me or potentially hear me. Jeff, I don't think people want to see that. So, Beautiful, I enjoyed it a lot. I heard a lot of people say the same thing I was thinking as we were leaving the theatre, and that you don't realise how many songs Carole King wrote. So, oh doggy, is that nice? Excuse the dog. So I went into it knowing vaguely who Carole King was, but I probably wouldn't have been able to tell you any of her song titles, despite the fact that I know some of her songs. Does that make sense? But I didn't realise she was such a prolific songwriter, and what her and her husband were. Jeff. So that it was just really interesting, and the soundtrack was really good, and I enjoyed it. So I was in the middle circle, which I can't remember what they've called it in this theatre, in row L, which is pretty much the back. I wouldn't go any further back than L, because I think the stage would be quite obscured because of the overhang of the balcony. For me, it was absolutely fine, but if I was one row back, I think it might have taken away bits of the stage for me. and I was lucky that with the first half no one was sat in front of me, but then they did in the second half, and that was a little bit more annoying. But people are people, it happens every time in a theatre. I was right in that, thanks Jeff, I was right in that I was one of the younger people in the theatre. There were a group of teenagers, I think they were like sixth formers behind me, but they all came as a group. And the other people that were probably around my age or younger were there with like their mum or their grandma or something. So I do think it might have been a bit, well, it wasn't strange me going by myself because I wanted to go and see it, and that's not strange, but it may have looked strange to the people around me, particularly when I came into the theatre and they're like, oh, where are you sat? And I'm like, I'm that individual seat between you two, between you groups of people. So it was comfortable enough, but there isn't a huge amount of legroom where I was sat, and I'm going to assume that's because it's an old theatre and that's just the case. And at points I did question the sound mix, but again, that might just been the show. That might not have actually been anything to do with the theatre. Onto the show itself. The principal actors, so the woman playing Carole King, her husband, I've just seen the show and I've already forgotten his name, Cynthia, Barry, those, the key people, they were all really good and all their voices were really good, but for some reason the ensemble, so there was groups of people playing the singers that they wrote for, so like the Drifters, which we'll get onto in a minute, and some other people, I don't know, they just felt really weak, and that was kind of just pointing you a bit like, oh, I don't want them to sing the song, can we not have one of the others please, because they're like way better and obviously better. So that was a shame. Most of the theatre I've seen is in the West End, and that's not to say that touring productions are worse by any stretch of the imagination, because I have seen a few of those and they've been great too, but you do wonder about the casting a little bit for these ones, because the whole point of this show is to showcase a songwriter, and surely you want the best people to sing the songs, and as I said, some of them in the ensemble just didn't seem to have strong enough voices for the songs that they were singing, particularly as it's a jukebox musical, so everybody knows the songs that they are singing and how they are supposed to be sung, which is always problematic in these kind of things. So maybe, I don't know how far they are into their tour, I don't know which part of the tour Sheffield's come into it, we might be like really close to the end and it's taken a toll on their voices and stuff like that. There's a whole heap of reasons behind it, so I wouldn't say that's a reason not to go and see the show, because it is a really good show, and certainly the woman playing Carole King, who I should have the website still up so we can actually get her name, Molly Grace Cutler. Really enjoyed her performance, thought she was a brilliant singer. Her version of Natural Woman was just great, and yeah, just a very nice evening out. And it turns out Peter's also taken himself out on a solo date. He's gone to the cinema to see the Top Gun Maverick film. I think it might be the first time he's been out to the cinema by himself, so it'll be interesting to see how his night's been. But I think we've both tweeted, so it looks like we don't like each other because we've just gone out separately without each other. But yeah, right, it's time to have some water, very thirsty, and then I'm going to think about going to bed. No, I'm not. I nearly forgot to talk about the Drifters there. So, the Drifters were included in this show because Carole King and, oh, I've got it on here now that I've looked at my phone, Jerry Goffin, they wrote songs for the Drifters, but obviously I've recently seen The Drifters Go, and at no point in that did they mention who wrote the songs, which I find interesting. I'll link my review to that one up here as well, but I find it interesting that that was not in the show, when it was obviously a large part of their story is the songs that they sung. But then I guess they were saying about Faye Treadwell's story rather than the songs of the Drifters, so maybe that's why. But I don't remember there being any mention of Carole King in that musical, which is interesting to me. Right, now I'm going to have some water and think about going to bed. So there you go. That was my trip to see Beautiful, the Carole King musical at the Lyceum Theatre here in Sheffield. So if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!